a very good panel. Mike Gallagher did a great transition for us, talking about potential regulation in the social casino space. I'd like to introduce four of the very leaders in the space. One is Paul Thelen. He's the CEO of Big Fish Games. Lifelong gamer, built his first game when he was 12 years old. He bootstrapped Big Fish 11 years ago. And a couple years ago, they entered the social casino space, and now at Bootstrap Company, he's doing over $250 million a year. Very impressive feat. Next, we have Ken Murphy. Ken's the Vice President of Studios at GameHouse. He's leading the cross-platform effort for social gaming, social casino across the world. He was the leader in developing the sweepstakes package that they've built into it, which is very interesting positioning, and also is currently making the all-new Slingo games. We also have Chris Griffin, who is the CEO of Betable, and their focus is to create legal, real money gambling inside of casual games. It's a very interesting, melding of the regulated gambling space and the different regulated, as we were just told, social casino space. And then finally, we have a late addition to the panel, but a very good addition. Vicens Marti, who is the CEO of Akamon. Akamon is the leading social casino content platform provider in Southern Europe and Latin America. They have 38 games across Facebook, mobile, and .com platforms. They were last year's Games Beat Startup of the Year. Congratulations. And then Vicens comes out of the real money gaming space, also ran an airline to Ibiza, which sounds like a phenomenal job. And then is very, very focused on FC Barcelona, so he never misses a game no matter where he is in the world. Finally, unfortunately, Robert Melendres from IGT Double Down had to cancel, so I think we're well represented though across the board. So I'm just going to set up a couple of subjects and hand it over to the panel here. The first is the growth expectations. This business, which really didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago, is already, according to Super Data, about a $2.8 billion business, growing to 4.4 by 2016. That's about 16% growth. 10% is coming from desktop. About 27% is growth in mobile over that time period. So a lot of drivers. How big do you think this business gets, and where does the growth come from?
I'll just start up. I mean, if you think about the way people play, at least social casinos, it's very bite-sized, and if you look at what previously existed for digital, it was a PC in your den. It doesn't really cater to going in and spending 3 hours. It caters to more of a 3-hour long form entertainment. Smartphones, tablets, obviously are growing faster than ever before, being introduced into new price points around the world. And so I think the growth will come from emerging markets that are adopting smartphone technologies that can actually play these more advanced casino games. In addition to the continued just astronomical growth we see in Europe, the US, and China.
And you see that in the current usage data as well. The Super Data study that you just cited indicated that today, is with a $2 billion market, still upwards of 80% of the gameplay is kind of focused on the PC, but it's going to be the mobile side of this that really drives the growth.
Yeah, and we have not seen most of the world monetizing yet. I mean, we're seeing most of the money coming from the US, Australia, and the UK. I think we're still missing huge parts of the world that are playing, but still not paying too much. As soon as this takes off, I think the expectations might be on the lower side, and we might see even more growth than anticipated.
So it's a very large market growing. One big subject is we're talking about is the concentration of revenue. It's very, very centered on the top of the pyramid. Does this business become a business of a few scaled competitors, or is there room for more dynamic marketplaces as the market grows?
I mean, I'll start again just because I like to talk. Big Fish Games is not a big company relative to some of the competitors that are in the kind of number 2 through 5 spots in social casinos. But we've been able to hold our own and continue to outpace the industry. And so it really is a new business that a lot of incumbents don't necessarily have an advantage. It's about moving fast, being agile, iterating quickly, and understanding what consumers want. So big people like Caesars can buy their way in, but that doesn't mean they can actually grow from that point of buying in.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think you may be seeing some consolidation around where revenue is sitting for social games, but for real money, and certainly the whole reason that Betable exists is to remove the barriers to entry and really give everyone an opportunity to participate and compete in the industry. And I think to Paul's point, the companies that are moving quickly and getting in to the space early are able to take advantage of a lot of, I'd say, inefficiencies in the market right now, and hopefully grow big quickly before that consolidation does happen. But right now, I'd say, at least for real money, the opposite is happening right now, where you're seeing kind of more of a fragmentation of the industry because we are removing the barriers that are protecting the incumbents at the moment. So.
I think you see two different forces. I think on mobile acquisition, it's certainly a game for the big ones right now. Escalating costs, CPIs are a clear factor, and you need the cash to get your users. On the other hand, if you think about it, the only three genres that are monetizing are slots, bingo, and to a certain extent poker, which, by the way, is still up for grabs for the champion. I think we'll still need to see some different sort of games and combinations of games, such as suites, making it big. And Big Fun is obviously a good example of that.
I think it's hard to deny, though, the power that these very large competitors you brought into this space and the amount of aggregation they've driven in a relatively short amount of time. I agree with Paul. A lot of that has come through acquisition. They've kind of bought their way to the top of the charts, but they've also been very successful in migrating in their IP, migrating in a lot of their expertise, particularly around kind of the core of the game, the math models and things like that, and they've had a lot of traction. So we're going to see a lot of consolidation pressure in this space as we go forward. There's going to be a lot of drive for differentiation.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point. You've got about 50% of all social casino revenue coming from slots today, and only really IGT is the biggest. They made the biggest play in the space and have one of the biggest companies. Caesars is another large slot play. Their content's not necessarily coming from the traditional casino slot providers, and there are really 4 of those in the marketplace. Do you think that over time, the companies that are making the best content in the gambling space end up dominating the slot portion of the social casino space?
One of the things that will hamstring the people who are bringing their existing real-world slots into the digital space is that it can be somewhat commoditized, that they're all very similar. They may have different math models, they may have different art, but they're largely just the real spinning. One of the approaches we've taken that has really differentiated ourselves is focusing beyond the slot. What are the mini games? What are the dynamics of the social environment around the people sitting around the banking machines that can interact and actually affect each other's play? We're not bound by the real money gaming payout rules, and so we need to be a lot more creative about the experience you get in the slot game that the real money guys don't really think about.
I think, look, I mean, this industry is still a baby, and if we think that everything has been discovered already, we're heavily mistaken. I think innovation can come from so many fronts. I mean, a social wrapper, suites of games, different combinations, different platforms, different distribution. We're going to be very surprised 1 year from now who the champions will be.
I agree. I mean, you touched on the rate of iteration or innovation in the space. If you actually historically look at the gambling space, I don't know if many people are aware, but the newest game that you can play in gambling is bingo. That was invented 60 years ago. The second newest is a slot machine that was invented 126 years ago, and before that was roulette, which was invented by Pascal. So the rate of innovation and change in the real money space is extremely slow. Typically, it takes a traditional gambling company, anywhere from 6 months to 18 months to launch a new game. Games that are being developed on our platform have less than 48-hour iteration cycles. So if you think about what that means over the course of a year, as you mentioned, with potentially thousands of developers launching games and competing very aggressively to be top of the charts. Real money gaming can look very, very different in a very short period of time, thanks to a lot of the work that these guys are doing and what we're enabling.
It is great to see the amount of experimentation in the space that you can't see in the regulated real-world environment. And a lot of it does kind of come at the metagame level, if you will, because, as you say, the core of the experiences themselves, to a large degree, are very well established. Commoditized is maybe too strong a word, but maybe not too strong. And the different kinds of experiences that you can start to put around the game, all the stuff that the Big Fish does at the social level, the things we're trying to do with the sweepstakes integration, many of the different kinds of metagames experiences that you've seen experimented with. That experimentation is a fascinating, really encouraging component of having casual and traditional game developers start to come into this space.
Well, let's not forget that the industry, in my opinion, I always say this and get people mad, was born because the real money gambling guys forgot to innovate. I mean, they stayed for 5 years talking to regulators. Most of the operators had white labels of B2B suppliers anyway. For the users, it was exactly the same experience with a different skin. And then suddenly, some guys invented the social casino industry. So, I mean, if that's the origin of the industry, I think we can expect much more innovation in the next few years.
I think it's a very good point. Government regulation is a great barrier to entry in the real money gaming space, and sort of makes it so that the big companies are the ones that stay big. But in the unregulated social gaming world, you have a lot of the innovation coming from startups, the new thinking coming from startups, because they don't have that. Wait a second, I've got to find 5 different people I've got to ask permission for before I can change an icon on my game.
So I think that's an important point when you ask the question about where the innovation is going to come from. I don't think it will come from the traditional gambling companies. I think when you have very few competitors and you haven't had to compete at the content level beyond modifying a math model for your company's entire lifespan, you're pretty numb to having to be agile and move quickly and actually innovate on the core content, the core game mechanics, the actual experience that mechanic is wrapped around, what the social context of that game is, and even thinking about things like putting viral mechanics in your game. That's totally foreign to the traditional gambling industry, and I do think you're right. I do think that the actual mechanics and the math is largely commoditized. So I think that really, I think the innovation is going to largely come from the social and mobile guys leading their way into the real money space, bringing those experiences with them.
As an industry, I think this is one of the areas we have to be most mindful of, though, as well, because with all of these really attractive growth scenarios, and the fact that now real-world players are coming into the space, you're already starting to hear mumblings about questions about whether the social component of this should be a regulated component in the industry, and what would that wind up doing to regulation, to innovation, and our ability to create really compelling new experiences along the way. And I think we have to be active participants in that process, not passive participants in that process.
I also think there needs to be some clarity around what those regulations actually are, because it's a bit of a red herring. I mean, the social components already are regulated. If you have a real money game and a virtual currency version of the exact same game, it has to have the same RTP. That is regulated. That already exists. So I think there has been, intentionally or not, I think there has been a big deal made around regulation of social games. I'm sure that one wouldn't have to, think too hard around why that is, and why the gambling companies are trying to push for that regulation. But a lot of that stuff is already regulated, and I think, to your point, it just has to be kind of we have to be kind of more vocal about.
Yeah, we have to be part of the dialogue.
A social casino is no more gambling than Farm Villas or Candy Crush. It just happens to be a familiar game. And if you look at who's pushing for regulation of social gaming, it's people who have vested interest in washing it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so it's not logical. So we're trying to continue the innovation cycle of this is a social game, this is not a gambling game. And that's why if you look at our games, they're diverging more and more from being gambling. It's really a social environment where people can play familiar mechanics and pastime. But if you actually look at monetization and the whale-driven nature of real money gaming, it's very different than social gaming. You say, social gaming is whale-driven. Sort of, but if you talk to Facebook and some other people who have actually released stats, the number one whale-driven mechanic is actually turn-based strategy games. So do those need to be regulated? You know, it kind of brings up that question that just because it has a familiar mechanic doesn't make it gambling.
Yeah, the reality is it is regulated. There's different regulators, right? You've got privacy issues, you've got banking issues. It's heavily regulated, but it's not regulated by the Gambling Commission. Gambling is defined as consideration. You have to make a bet. You have to have some sort of chance. So, a random outcome, and you have to have a prize that has value. This world does not have a prize, and that's why it sort of is in that definition of not gambling. There are some, there's some direction in some countries where that definition is actually being changed. In Belgium, for instance, they consider social casino gambling. Australia might be moving down that path a little bit. China, it's off limits for different reasons. It's.
I think that's up to the games industry to educate and kind of come together and educate these regulators that this is a social game and it is no more gambling than, again, Candy Crush or Farmville or hating.
Couldn't agree with you more. The International Social Gaming Coalition, which I think a lot of you are part of, very important organization where the leaders in the space are coming together and talking about these conversations and basically educating the different regulators about sort of what it is and comparing it to other things in the marketplace. It's an incredibly important part of the evolution of this overall industry. There is a threat to a certain degree in the regulatory side. We go and try to educate everybody and say it's not gambling, but you're going to have people that are trying to quash it. One interesting wrinkle in that is there are some big competitors in the space that are really used to dealing with gambling commission regulators, right? They've got teams and teams of people that talk to them a lot. They've got lobbyists on their side. And then that's the IDTs and Caesars of the world. Then you've got some of the other scaled competitors who came out more out of the casual side. Do you think if regulation from the gambling world starts creeping into the social casino space that those traditional gambling companies would be benefited, or they'd be positioned better?
Okay, I think the industry has, I don't know why, every time we do a panel anywhere in any conference, we end up talking about regulation. I mean, there's so many more interesting transitions that the industry is going through. For example, the huge transition from Facebook cameras to mobile, the new platforms, the new markets. I think regulation is taking its own path. As we mentioned, the industry is getting its act together, is organizing an association. And it is very obvious that some of the real money gambling companies have made successful acquisitions, I have to say, and most of them have not crossed the paths. They kept separated things very correctly. So at the end of the day, I think we're not doing ourselves a favor if we end up every debate talking only about regulation.
I agree with you. We don't need to have the debate because Betable has already solved the problem for everyone.
Well, to completely agree, there's a transition that's happening across the world in the real money gaming space as well. The U.S. and online gaming is becoming legal. It's legal in Nevada right now. It'll launch in Delaware and New Jersey in the coming months. California is right behind it. There's multiple other states that are looking at the online casino business, which the incumbents in that space will be the traditional casinos and the people that are working in the licensed gambling space. There's a lot of talk about what the combination, or what is the intersection or crossover between social players and the real money gaming players are going to be, both in the U.S. marketplace and more mature online gaming marketplaces like Europe. Chris, this is your betting a company on this. How do you see the positioning of that? Where do you see the overlaps, and is it different between the U.S. and Europe?
Not to talk about what we just said we were going to talk about. Do you mean from a regulatory perspective, or in terms of just?
No, from a user perspective.
Well, I think in terms of, so assuming that the U.S. were to open up tomorrow, which it's obviously not going to do, I think what you would see is, in terms of the difference of player behavior and what kinds of content would be successful, I think traditional casino games in the U.S. would likely be very successful in the beginning because that demand just hasn't been filled yet. I think if you look at more mature markets like Europe, where we talk to tons of we talk to our players on a daily basis, and they're pretty bored with the content that exists. To that that commodity content that we mentioned earlier, it's not interesting. There's nothing that distinguishes one slot machine from another, and I know that the casino industry would say that the coat of paint that they put on one slot machine makes one slot machine much more compelling than another, but I don't think anyone's really buying it. So the stuff that we're enabling in the more mature markets and everywhere in the world, and I think that long term this is the way the entire industry is going to go, we are enabling much more compelling and interesting experiences with these games where it can be anything from, I'd say the early stages of innovation, which we're seeing with Big Fish, which is really exciting, where it's these more traditional games that are social, or kind of changing the context in which these games are experienced, to more abstracted games where you could imagine, I don't know, just off the top of my head, abstracting roulette, where it becomes a fishing game, and I'm placing my reel on different parts of places of a pond, and when I pull my different price bait up, whatever I pull up is my prize. So you can do like abstracted games off of roulette. I mean, there's, and I think beyond that, then we would really enable, and where we ultimately see it going, is people being able to play and create games and then play them that where they can actually create their own new types of mechanics for real money. You mentioned kind of definitionally earlier, what is a real money? What makes a game gambling? And I think when people generally think of gambling, they think of it as as being very genre specific. We typically think of that as casino games, slots, blackjack, roulette, poker. That's not really gambling. Gambling is, to your point, it's consideration in. There's an element of chance that determines the outcome, and then there's consideration back out. And when you think of it that way, you realize, well, most games have an element of chance, and that kind of pay per play mechanic can be applied to way more games than just that very narrow kind of genre specific definition that we typically apply to real money gaming. What we're really enabling is the opening of what that can mean and how it can be applied. And to get back to your question, I think that because the more mature markets are so saturated with this commoditized content, the newer innovative stuff will be really driving the market forward. And I think obviously the newer markets will be fast followers.
I think if you look at why people are playing, one of our big findings, we always said the UK was a test, and we learned a lot. And if you look at the existing social players and then you offer them real money gaming, a certain percentage of them will take you up on that. But if you take a sample of any 1,000 people playing any game, a certain percentage will take you up on that. And so the psychographic needs that social gaming provides versus real money gaming is completely different. What we found the big synergy to be is in customer acquisition, because when you bring someone in, you don't know whether they're going to be the 80%, 90% that filter out to social, or the 10% that want to play for real money, and actually their motivation is to win. Social gamers are there, it's a giant MMO, they're hanging out with friends, and they're leveling up, and they're doing cool social things. People in real money gaming, they want to win. And if they can do that around friends, that's even better. But they're doing it for a different reason. And the big kind of overlap, and why it's exciting to combine social with what we've done with Betable, is when you bring someone in, you let them self-select, and you can improve on your ROI and your ad spend in that way.
For sure. And I think there's also the point to be made of, from an investor point of view, what is it more interesting? I mean, at the end of the day, the three heavily regulated markets in Europe, except the UK, which has its own stance, Spain, Italy, and France, which is one of the three core markets for Akamon. I mean, not many people are making money in real money gaming anyhow. I mean, social continues to be a very, very interesting area where you see great returns, and most people are not having a great time in those regulated markets.
Which isn't surprising when you're competing against a few other big spending companies on the exact same products.
Correct.
It's
back to my point,
pretty tough to win.
Zero innovation. And at the end of the day, if you want to look at the numbers, 52 licenses at a heavy cost of 6 million euros in bank guarantees were issued in Spain. 10 of them decided not to operate.
Do we have time for one question? Any questions?
Question about the Betable business model. Do you indemnify all your customers in case any laws are broken or IP has been, someone accidentally plays where an area they shouldn't play?
We do. We take care of, we deal with, or we take care of, and I know that's, my answer is more general than kind of just being related to indemnification, but we take care of all the legal matters and all the regulatory and compliance matters for our partners. We make it so that they just have to focus on building good content.
Just a question for you guys. It's unfortunate we don't have IGT here today, but I was just wondering on if you guys are seeing the same level of growth in your businesses as they are, roughly up 100% year over year, and what's driving that?
I mean, our business is up close to 200% year over year. We're the #1 player in mobile social than we did used to be. So we've outpaced them. They are big on Facebook, but we went first into mobile for a reason. We do believe that mobile is an entertainment platform in the future. And now we are also going to start offering it on things like Facebook on the PC as well as secondary platforms where we're leading with mobile. They're kind of catching up to us and we're trying to catch up to us in mobile. They're very strong in Facebook, but that's not necessarily where the growth is in the coming years.
We're seeing huge growth on countries and markets such as Brazil, different monetization, but growth rates are phenomenal.
And we're seeing modestly good growth, duking it out on Facebook first. We didn't take the first mover advantage on mobile, smart move of Paul's and Big Fishes to do that. But the tide is still rising, so we are continuing to grow as we differentiate and make our products right.
And we weren't the first, we're just the best.
The best.
I think we're out of time here, guys. Panelists, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.